The grand palace of Vyrexia stood tall under the twin suns, its silver towers reflecting the golden light. Inside, deep within the royal halls, Princess Ciara sat in silence. Today was supposed to be a joyful day, her marriage announcement, but instead it had turned into her greatest humiliation. The noble families had gathered in the great chamber, dressed in their finest robes, their jewel-covered horns shining under the crystal chandeliers. Her father, Emperor Xelfar, had invited the most powerful suitors from across the empire. But one by one, they had all rejected her. "I cannot accept this union," the first noble had said, lowering his gaze. "She is unfit," another had whispered. Ciara clenched her fists. She already knew why. It was no secret. Unlike other Vyrexians, her genetic structure was different. A rare mutation had made it impossible for her to produce offspring with her kind. Among her people, this was seen as a curse, a sign of weakness. And for a princess, someone meant to continue the royal bloodline, it was an unforgivable flaw. Her father, usually a figure of strength, had been silent. He had not defended her. He had only watched as his daughter was discarded like an unwanted object. When the last suitor declined, Ciara felt something inside her shatter. A desperate choice. That night, as the palace halls grew quiet, Ciara stood by the balcony, looking at the endless sky. The twin moons glowed brightly, but she felt no warmth from their light. She had spent her whole life trying to prove her worth, as a warrior, as a diplomat, as a leader, yet none of it mattered. In the eyes of her people, she was still incomplete. But why should she accept their judgment? Her mind raced. If the Vyrexians saw her as useless, then maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe her future wasn't with them at all. Her glowing blue eyes turned toward the stars. There was one species in the galaxy that saw things differently. A species that valued companionship over genetics, love over bloodlines. Humans. A strange idea formed in her mind. What if she found a human? What if she married one? Her heart pounded at the thought. It was crazy. Humans and Vyrexians rarely interacted beyond trade and politics. But wasn't that the whole point? If her people rejected her, then she would find someone who wouldn't. Determined, she turned away from the balcony and made her decision. She would leave Vyrexia. She would go to Earth. The journey begins. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Ciara boarded her private starship. She had programmed the coordinates, one of Earth's largest cities. She wore a simple cloak, hiding her royal armor. If she arrived as a princess, humans might see her as a political figure, not as a woman seeking a true connection. No, she needed to blend in. She needed to understand their ways first. As the engines roared to life, she took one last look at her home planet. This was not her world anymore. The ship lifted off, piercing through the clouds and into the endless darkness of space. Her new life had begun. The journey to Earth was long, but Princess Ciara barely noticed the time. As her ship moved through the vastness of space, her mind was filled with thoughts of the unknown world ahead. Would the humans accept her? Would she find someone who could understand her pain? Or would she be rejected once again? Her fingers tightened around the controls. No, she had made her choice. There was no turning back now. After days of travel, Earth finally appeared before her, a blue and green world covered in swirling white clouds. It looked so different from Vyrexia, where the land was mostly golden deserts and silver mountains. She took a deep breath and activated the ship's cloaking device. She did not want to cause fear by arriving as an alien princess. For now, she needed to blend in. As her ship entered the atmosphere, the controls trembled slightly from the friction, but she handled it easily. With careful precision, she guided the vessel toward a hidden forest area near a human city. Her ship landed softly between the tall trees, its engines humming before powering down completely. Ciara placed her hand on the cold metal of the ship's interior. This was it. She had arrived. A world unlike her own. Stepping outside, The first thing Zayara noticed was the smell of the air, fresh, filled with life. Birds chirped in the trees, and a cool wind brushed against her skin. Everything felt so alive. She had read about Earth, studied its culture from holographic records, but being here was different. She looked down at herself, making sure her disguise was in place. She wore a long hooded cloak to hide her alien features, her glowing blue eyes, her silver markings, and the slight curve of her horns. Now she had only one mission: find a human. First encounter. As she walked toward the city, the streets became busier. Cars moved on the roads, their headlights bright in the evening air. Humans walked in groups, talking, laughing, holding hands. She felt out of place, but also curious. Then she saw something that made her pause. A man was sitting on the sidewalk, hunched over an old mechanical device. He had short brown hair, rough hands, and a focused expression as he worked. Something about him felt different from the others. He wasn't like the wealthy traders or military leaders she had seen in holograms. His clothes were simple, his jacket slightly worn, but his eyes held determination. Without thinking, Zayara stepped forward. "What are you doing?" she asked. The man looked up, surprised. For a moment, he stared at her, as if trying to figure out where she had come from. Fixing this, he finally said, holding up the mechanical part. "It's a power converter. The city needs it for the power grid." Zayara tilted her head. She had studied human technology, but she didn't expect someone to be repairing something alone in the cold. "You do this yourself?" she asked. "Yeah," the man replied with a small shrug. "Someone has to." Zayara studied him for a moment. In her world, nobles never did such work. It was always done by workers or machines. But this human, he chose to do it. "Who are you?" she asked. He wiped his hands on his jacket. "Ethan Carter." Then, raising an eyebrow, he asked, "And who are you?" Zayara hesitated. She couldn't reveal the truth. "Not yet." "I am Zaya," she said, using a shorter version of her name. Ethan smiled slightly. "Nice to meet you, Zaya." For the first time in her life, someone had spoken to her without judgment, without fear, without rejection. And that's when she knew she had found the right place. Ethan looked at the mysterious woman standing before him. There was something unusual about her. Her posture was too straight, her speech too precise, and her eyes, they seemed to glow faintly under the streetlights. But he didn't ask questions. Not yet. Zayara, or Zaya, as she had introduced herself, watched Ethan carefully. He had spoken to her without hesitation, without fear, and that made her feel something strange, something warm. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her as just a person, not a failure, not a disappointment. Ethan sighed and wiped his hands on his jacket. "So, Zaya, what brings you out here so late?" Zayara hesitated. She had no clear plan for what to do next. She had left her homeworld in desperation, thinking only of finding a human who might accept her. But now that she was here, she realized she didn't know what came next. "I'm looking for someone," she said carefully. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Someone specific, or just someone?" Zayara shifted. "I need help." Ethan looked at her clothes, long and elegant, but simple enough to hide something underneath. There was no luggage, no sign that she had come from anywhere nearby. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. Zayara's heart pounded. Did he suspect something? "I traveled far." Ethan studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, if you need help, I guess I can offer some." Zayara blinked. Just like that. He was willing to help her without demanding anything in return. She had never seen such kindness before. A place to stay. Ethan finished repairing the power converter and stood up. "All right, that should do it." He stretched his arms, then looked back at Zayara. "Do you have a place to stay?" he asked. Zayara hesitated. She had planned to sleep inside her ship, but now that she had met Ethan, She felt an odd pull toward learning more about humans. "No," she said finally. Ethan sighed. "Well, I can't just leave you wandering around at night. It's not safe." Ziyara's lips parted slightly. He was concerned about her safety. Back on Phyrexia, no one had ever worried about her well-being, only her usefulness. "Come on," Ethan said, motioning for her to follow. "I have a small apartment. You can crash there for the night." Ziyara hesitated. Could she really trust him? But then she remembered. She had nowhere else to go. With a silent nod, she followed Ethan down the street. Inside the human's home. Ethan's apartment was small but warm. The walls were covered with books, tools, and strange human decorations. A soft chair sat in the corner, and a small light flickered on the ceiling. "This is where you live?" Ziyara asked, looking around. "Yeah, it's not much, but it's home," Ethan said, tossing his jacket onto a chair. Ziyara reached out, running her fingers along a wooden table. Phyrexian homes were made of metal and glass, but this felt alive. Ethan pulled out a blanket and handed it to her. "You can sleep on the couch." Ziyara took the blanket carefully. It was soft, warmer than anything she had ever touched before. Ethan yawned. "I'm gonna get some rest. If you need anything, just let me know." Ziyara watched as he walked to a small room and closed the door. She sat down on the couch, wrapping the blanket around her. It felt strange to be in a human home, surrounded by human things, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like an outcast. Maybe she had made the right choice after all. Ziyara woke up to the soft sound of birds outside the window. The air inside the apartment felt warm and safe, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She had expected a restless night, filled with fear of discovery, but instead, she had slept peacefully. The scent of something strange but pleasant filled the air. She sat up, adjusting the blanket around her, and turned toward the small kitchen area where Ethan was cooking. He glanced over his shoulder and smirked. "Morning, Zaya. You sleep okay?" Ziyara blinked. No one had ever asked her that before. "Yes," she said simply. Ethan nodded. "Good. You hungry?" Ziyara hesitated. Phyrexians had different dietary needs, but she had studied human food during her time on the ship. She needed to blend in. "Yes," she said again. Ethan placed a plate on the table. "It's just eggs and toast. Simple, but it'll keep you going." Ziyara looked at the food curiously. The eggs were yellow and soft, and the toast was crispy and brown. It looked different from the nutrient-packed cubes she was used to. She picked up the toast and took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly. It was delicious. She quickly took another bite, then another, finishing the toast faster than she had expected. Ethan chuckled. "I take it you liked it." Ziyara wiped her fingers on the napkin and nodded. "It is different, but good." Ethan leaned against the counter. "So, Zaya, I gotta ask, where are you really from?" Ziyara's heart skipped a beat. Had she made a mistake? Had he figured out she wasn't human? She lowered her eyes. "I told you. I traveled far." Ethan sighed. "Right. Far. But you don't have an ID, no luggage, and you talk like someone from, well, nowhere I've ever been." Ziyara remained silent. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I'm not gonna push you for answers. But if you're in trouble, you can tell me." Ziyara studied him. Why was he like this? Why did he care about a stranger? On her homeworld, no one ever cared unless they had something to gain. She decided to ask something instead. "Why did you help me?" Ethan looked surprised. "What do you mean? You don't know me. I could be dangerous. I could be lying." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. But you needed help." Ziyara frowned. "That is unusual." Ethan chuckled. "Maybe where you're from. But here, some of us actually try to do the right thing." Ziyara looked down at the empty plate. Maybe humans were different. Maybe that's why she had come here in the first place. A walk through the city. After breakfast, Ethan offered to show her around. Ziyara hesitated. More people meant more chances of discovery, but she needed to learn more about humans if she wanted to stay hidden. So she agreed. As they walked through the streets, Ziyara observed everything. The bright signs, the moving cars, the people talking and laughing. It was so different from Vyrexia, where everything was structured and controlled. She saw children running in a park, a man playing music on the street, a couple holding hands and smiling. Humans were free. She had never seen this kind of life before. "You're staring a lot," Ethan said, smirking. Ziyara quickly looked away. "I am observing." Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, I can tell." They stopped at a small shop, and Ethan bought 2 hot drinks. "Here," he said, handing one to her. "It's coffee." Ziyara took the cup carefully and sniffed it. The smell was rich and bitter, but not unpleasant. She took a sip and immediately winced at the taste. Ethan laughed. "Yeah, it's strong. You'll get used to it." Ziyara frowned but took another sip. She wanted to understand this world, even if it meant drinking bitter liquid. A warning. As they continued walking, Ziyara suddenly felt uneasy. Something was watching her. She turned slightly and caught sight of a man standing by a streetlight. His eyes locked onto her. He was wearing dark clothes, and his stance was too rigid, too focused. Ziyara's instincts screamed danger. Ethan noticed her tense posture. "Zaya, you okay?" Ziyara quickly looked away from the man. "We should go." Ethan frowned, but nodded. "All right." They turned down a different street, walking faster. Ziyara kept her senses sharp, but when she glanced back, the man was gone. Her heart pounded. Had the Vyrexian Empire sent someone after her? She had left her world behind, but maybe her world hadn't left her. Ziyara's heart pounded as she and Ethan walked quickly through the streets. She tried to appear calm, but her mind was racing. Who was that man? Was he watching her? Could he be from the Vyrexian Empire? She had escaped, traveled across the stars, and hidden among humans, but maybe they had found her. Ethan noticed her tension. "Zaya, what's wrong?" Ziyara hesitated. Should she tell him? She had been careful not to reveal too much about herself, but Ethan had helped her, protected her. Maybe he deserved some truth. She took a slow breath and looked at him. "Someone was watching us." Ethan's expression changed. His relaxed posture stiffened, and his eyes became sharp. "Are you sure?" Ziyara nodded. "A man in dark clothes. He was staring at me. When I looked back, he was gone." Ethan scanned the street behind them, but saw nothing. He exhaled through his nose. "All right. Let's not take any chances. We'll take a different route home." Ziyara followed as Ethan led her through narrow streets and quieter alleys, avoiding crowded areas. Her respect for him grew. He wasn't just kind, he was smart. When they finally reached the apartment, Ethan locked the door behind them and checked the windows. "If someone's following you, we need to be careful." Ziyara watched him silently. He believed her. He didn't doubt her. She lowered her gaze. "Thank you." Ethan turned to her. "You don't have to thank me. But Zaya, I think it's time you tell me the truth." "The truth?" At last. Ziyara sat on the couch, hands clasped tightly together. She had spent her whole life keeping secrets, but now she had no choice. She looked at Ethan. "I am not from this world." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I figured." Ziyara blinked. "You already knew." Ethan smirked. "Come on, Zaya. You talk different, act different, and don't know basic things about Earth. I've been suspicious since day one." Ziyara frowned. "Then why did you help me?" Ethan shrugged. "Because you needed it." Ziyara stared at him. Was that really all it took? Just because she needed help? Humans were truly different. She sighed. "I am from a planet called Vyrexia. My people are not like humans. We live under strict rules. Everything is controlled. What we do, what we say, even who we marry. Ethan leaned against the table, listening. Ziara continued, her voice softer. I was chosen to marry a high-ranking officer. It was not my choice. But if I refused, I would be punished. So, I ran away. Ethan's jaw clenched. They wanted to force you to marry someone. That's messed up. Ziara nodded. I stole a small ship and escaped. But if they find me, they will take me back. And this time, I won't be able to run. Ethan exhaled sharply. All right. So, what do we do now? Ziara tilted her head. You still want to help me? Ethan scoffed. Of course. You think I'm just gonna let them take you back? Ziara felt a strange warmth in her chest. No one had ever protected her before. She swallowed. Then we must be careful. If they have found me, they will not stop searching. Ethan crossed his arms. Then we need a plan. An unexpected visitor. As night fell, Ziara remained by the window, watching the streets below. She felt safer with Ethan, but the fear of being taken back still haunted her. Ethan sat on the couch, looking deep in thought. We need to figure out if they're really after you or if that guy was just some random creep. Ziara nodded. But how? A knock on the door made them both freeze. Ethan exchanged a glance with Ziara before walking to the door. Who is it? A voice answered, deep and unfamiliar. Delivery. Ethan frowned. We didn't order anything. Silence. Ziara's muscles tensed. Something was wrong. Ethan stepped back from the door. Get ready to run. Ziara swallowed hard. Had they finally found her? Ethan's heart pounded as he stared at the door. The voice on the other side had stopped speaking. Whoever it was, they weren't just a delivery person. Ziara's breathing was slow but tense. They found me. Ethan moved quickly, grabbing her wrist. We need to go. Now. Ziara nodded, pushing down the fear rising in her chest. She had run before. She could do it again. Ethan led her toward the back door, moving quietly. Just as they reached it. Bang! The front door burst open. Ethan turned, eyes wide. A tall figure in black stepped inside, scanning the room. Ziara's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the uniform. Virexian enforcers. The figure spotted them. Stop right there. But Ethan didn't stop. He shoved the back door open, pulling Ziara outside. Run. They sprinted down the alley as footsteps thundered behind them. A city in the dark. The streets were dimly lit, but Ethan knew the area well. He pulled Ziara into another alley, ducking behind a row of garbage bins. Ziara pressed herself against the wall, trying to control her breathing. They won't stop, Ethan. Ethan peeked around the corner. Yeah. Well, neither will we. Footsteps echoed nearby. More of them were coming. Ethan cursed under his breath. We need a way out. Ziara looked up. A fire escape ladder was hanging just above them. She nudged Ethan. There. Ethan followed her gaze and nodded. Good thinking. He crouched down. Climb up. I'll boost you. Ziara hesitated. But no time. Go. She grabbed the edge of the ladder and Ethan lifted her up. She pulled herself onto the first platform and reached down for him. Ethan jumped, catching her hand. She pulled with all her strength as he climbed up beside her. Below, the enforcers rushed into the alley. They went up. One of them shouted. Ethan grabbed Ziara's hand. Keep going. They climbed higher, reaching the rooftop. The city stretched out before them, a maze of glowing lights and dark streets. Ethan looked around. We need to get farther away. Ziara pointed toward a bridge in the distance. If we cross that, we can lose them. Ethan grinned. You really are smart. Ziara felt warmth in her chest. Even in danger, Ethan could still make her feel safe. They ran across the rooftops, their steps light against the metal. Behind them, the enforcers were slower but still following. Ziara's mind raced. There had to be a way to lose them. Then she saw it, a gap between the buildings. It was wide, but maybe. "Ethan," she called. "We have to jump." Ethan glanced at the gap and smirked. "You sure?" Ziyara nodded. Ethan took her hand. "All right." Together, they ran toward the edge. 1 step, 2 steps. They jumped. For a moment, they were weightless. The wind rushed past them. Then their feet hit solid ground on the other side. Ethan landed with a grunt, rolling onto his feet. Ziyara stumbled but caught herself. The enforcers stopped at the edge. They hesitated. The jump was too far for them. Ethan exhaled. "Looks like we're safe. For now." Ziyara wasn't so sure. The enforcers wouldn't give up that easily. A desperate plan. Ethan and Ziyara hurried down the fire escape of the next building, slipping into the shadows of the street. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. "We need a new plan." Ziyara nodded. "They will not stop hunting me." Ethan frowned. "Then we need to make sure they can't find you." Ziyara hesitated. "How?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "We disappear. Leave the city. Go somewhere they won't expect." Ziyara's eyes widened. "You would leave with me?" Ethan shrugged. "You think I'd let you do this alone?" Ziyara felt something deep in her heart, a strange mix of gratitude and something more. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running alone. Ethan grinned. "Come on, Zaya. Let's disappear." Ethan tightened his grip on Ziyara's hand as they hurried through the empty streets. The enforcers wouldn't stop searching for them. They had to disappear before sunrise. Ziyara's heart pounded. "Where do we go now?" Ethan glanced around, thinking fast. "The spaceport." Ziyara frowned. "It will be heavily guarded." Ethan smirked. "That's why we're not walking through the front door." Ethan turned, eyes wide. A tall figure in black stepped inside, scanning the room. Ziyara's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the uniform. Virexian enforcers. The figure spotted them. "Stop right there." But Ethan didn't stop. He shoved the back door open, pulling Ziyara outside. "Run." They sprinted down the alley as footsteps thundered behind them. A city in the dark. The streets were dimly lit, but Ethan knew the area well. He pulled Ziyara into another alley, ducking behind a row of garbage bins. Ziyara pressed herself against the wall, trying to control her breathing. "They won't stop, Ethan." Ethan peeked around the corner. "Yeah, well, neither will we." Footsteps echoed nearby. More of them were coming. Ethan cursed under his breath. "We need a way out." Ziyara looked up. A fire escape ladder was hanging just above them. She nudged Ethan. "There." Ethan followed her gaze and nodded. "Good thinking." He crouched down. "Climb up. I'll boost you." Ziyara hesitated. "But." "No time. Go." She grabbed the edge of the ladder, and Ethan lifted her up. She pulled herself onto the first platform and reached down for him. Ethan jumped, catching her hand. She pulled with all her strength as he climbed up beside her. Below, the enforcers rushed into the alley. They went up. One of them shouted. Ethan grabbed Ziyara's hand. "Keep going." They climbed higher, reaching the rooftop. The city stretched out before them, a maze of glowing lights and dark streets. Ethan looked around. "We need to get farther away." Ziyara pointed toward a bridge in the distance. "If we cross that, we can lose them." Ethan grinned. "You really are smart." Ziyara felt warmth in her chest. Even in danger, Ethan could still make her feel safe. They ran across the rooftops, their steps light against the metal. Behind them, the enforcers were slower but still following. Ziyara's mind raced. There had to be a way to lose them. Then she saw it, a gap between the buildings. It was wide, but maybe. "Ethan," she called. "We have to jump." Ethan glanced at the gap and smirked. "You sure?" Ziyara nodded. Ethan took her hand. "All right." Together, they ran toward the edge. 1 step, 2 steps. They jumped. For a moment, they were weightless. The wind rushed past them. Then their feet hit solid ground on the other side. Ethan landed with a grunt, rolling onto his feet. Ziara stumbled but caught herself. The enforcers stopped at the edge. They hesitated. The jump was too far for them. Ethan exhaled. Looks like we're safe. For now. Ziara wasn't so sure. The enforcers wouldn't give up that easily. A desperate plan. Ethan and Ziara hurried down the fire escape of the next building, slipping into the shadows of the street. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. We need a new plan. Ziara nodded. They will not stop hunting me. Ethan frowned. Then we need to make sure they can't find you. Ziara hesitated. How? Ethan's jaw tightened. We disappear. Leave the city. Go somewhere they won't expect. Ziara's eyes widened. You would leave with me. Ethan shrugged. You think I'd let you do this alone? Ziara felt something deep in her heart, a strange mix of gratitude and something more. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running alone. Ethan grinned. Come on, Zia. Let's disappear. Ethan tightened his grip on Ziara's hand as they hurried through the empty streets. The enforcers wouldn't stop searching for them. They had to disappear before sunrise. Ziara's heart pounded. Where do we go now? Ethan glanced around, thinking fast. The spaceport. Ziara frowned. It will be heavily guarded. Ethan smirked. That's why we're not walking through the front door. She followed as he led her into an old maintenance tunnel. The air smelled damp, and the walls were covered in rust. Are you sure about this? She asked. Ethan nodded. Trust me. Ziara stared at him. He had done so much for her, risked everything. And now he was willing to leave his life behind. For her. She followed him deeper into the tunnel. The escape plan. The tunnel led to a service hatch near the spaceport. Through a small gap, they could see the landing pads. Ethan pointed. See that ship? Ziara's eyes widened. A cargo freighter. Ethan nodded. Unregistered. It's our best shot. She hesitated. You planned this, didn't you? Ethan grinned. Had to be ready for anything. Ziara felt warmth in her chest. No one had ever thought about her this much before. They moved carefully, avoiding patrols. The cargo ship was loading supplies, and the workers weren't paying attention. Ethan grabbed Ziara's hand. Stay close. They slipped inside, hiding behind crates. The engines hummed as the ship prepared for departure. A voice crackled over the intercom. Final checks complete. Prepare for launch. Ziara exhaled. We made it. Ethan chuckled. Not yet. Trouble on board. Just as they started to relax, footsteps echoed nearby. 2 crew members were doing a final inspection. Ethan whispered, Stay quiet. The workers passed by, but one of them stopped. Wait, did you hear that? Ethan held his breath. Ziara pressed against him, her body tense. The worker shook his head. Never mind. They walked away. Ethan sighed in relief. That was close. Ziara looked up at him. You really aren't afraid of anything, are you? Ethan smirked. Only when I have a reason to be. For a moment, they just stared at each other. So much had happened. But now, they were finally free. The ship rumbled as it lifted off. They were leaving the planet. Ziara's eyes shimmered. We did it. Ethan grinned. Told you we would. A promise for the future. Hours passed as the ship drifted through space. Ethan and Ziara sat together in the dark cargo hold, watching the stars through a small window. Ziara spoke softly. I don't know what happens next. Ethan shrugged. We'll figure it out. She turned to him. You left everything behind for me. Ethan smiled. Didn't have much to leave anyway. Ziara hesitated. But why? Ethan's expression softened. Because you needed someone. Her chest tightened. No one had ever chosen her before. She took a deep breath. Then, let's stay together. Ethan chuckled. Sounds like a plan. Ziyara smiled. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running. She was home.